I never thought my sister's wedding would be the day everything changed. Standing in that elegant ballroom, wearing a dress I'd bought with my own money, watching everyone celebrate, I felt invisible. But I guess that's how I'd felt my whole life around my father. My name is Rebecca, and for 28 years, I've carried the weight of being a disappointment. Not because I failed at life, but because I succeeded in ways my father couldn't understand or accept. You see, Colonel Thomas Hartford had a very specific vision of what his daughter should be, and I shattered that vision the day I chose my own path. Growing up in a military family meant structure, discipline, and expectations carved in stone. My father had served 30 years in the Army, rising through the ranks with determination and pride. Every morning started at 5:30 sharp. Breakfast was served at 600 hours. Homework was completed with the same precision as military drills. My older brother Marcus followed the script perfectly, enlisting at 18 and making my father beam with pride at every promotion. Then there was me, the girl who preferred books to boot camp, who cried during action movies, who wanted to be a teacher instead of a soldier. From the time I was 7 years old, I knew I was letting him down. I remember the day I told him I wanted to teach children to read. He looked at me like I'd announced I wanted to quit school and join the circus. "Teaching is fine, Rebecca," he'd said, his voice tight with disappointment. "But it's not a real challenge. Anyone can teach. The military builds character. It makes you strong." I tried to explain that teaching was challenging, that shaping young minds mattered, but he'd already turned away. That was his signature move, turning away when I didn't meet his standards. My mother tried to bridge the gap between us. She'd pull me aside after particularly difficult conversations and whisper that he loved me, that he just didn't know how to show it. But love shouldn't feel like constant evaluation. Love shouldn't make you feel like you're perpetually failing an exam you never signed up to take. When I went to college for education instead of ROTC, he stopped asking about my classes. When I graduated with honors and got my first teaching position at an elementary school in the city, he changed the subject whenever anyone asked about my work. At family gatherings, he'd spend hours talking about Marcus's achievements, his deployments, his commendations. When someone inevitably asked about me, he'd give a tight smile and say something like, "Rebecca's doing her thing with the kids." Her thing. As if my entire career, my passion, my purpose could be reduced to a dismissive phrase that said everything about how little he valued it. The worst part wasn't the dismissiveness. It was the comparisons. Marcus became the measuring stick against which I was constantly found wanting. Marcus was brave. I was timid. Marcus served his country. I just served snacks at parent-teacher conferences. Marcus made him proud. I made him change the subject. I stopped going to family dinners for a while. It was easier than sitting at that table, watching him light up when Marcus called from overseas, then barely look up from his plate when I tried to share a story about one of my students learning to read. My mother would call, crying, begging me to come back, to try harder, to understand that he just wanted the best for me. But that was the problem. He wanted the best for his idea of me, not for the person I actually was. Years passed like that. Holidays became tense negotiations. I showed up, smiled politely, kept my stories to myself, and left as soon as it was socially acceptable. My father and I existed in the same space but lived in different worlds. He never asked about my students, never acknowledged the awards I won for innovative teaching methods, never seemed to notice that I was actually good at what I did. There was this one Thanksgiving, 3 years before the wedding, that crystallized everything for me. I'd arrived at my parents' house with a box of handmade thank you cards for my students. 23 different children had written me notes about how I'd helped them learn to read, how I'd made school fun, how I'd believed in them when no one else did. I was so proud of those cards. They represented everything I'd worked for, everything I valued. Marcus had just gotten back from deployment, and the house was full of relatives I barely recognized. Everyone gathered in the living room, and my father stood at the center, holding court like he always did. He had Marcus stand next to him, and for 45 minutes, he recounted every detail of my brother's latest tour. The missions he'd completed, the commendations he'd received, the respect he'd earned from his commanding officers. I sat on the couch, holding my box of cards, waiting for a pause in the conversation. When it finally came, I spoke up. I brought something to share too. My students made me these cards. I thought maybe everyone would like to see them. My father glanced at the box, then at me, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not interest, not pride, something closer to impatience. That's nice, Rebecca. Maybe later. Marcus was just about to tell us about the rescue operation in Kandahar. Later never came. The cards stayed in the box. I left before dessert, claiming I had papers to grade, and cried the entire drive home. My mother called the next day, asking why I'd left so early, telling me I'd hurt my father's feelings by not staying. I almost laughed. I'd hurt his feelings, as if he'd ever once considered mine. But I kept teaching, kept pouring everything I had into my students, kept volunteering at the Military Family Center every Saturday morning, working with kids whose parents were overseas, kids who understood what it felt like to have someone important miss all the important moments. Those kids got me in a way my own father never had. I remember one little girl named Sophia. She was 8 years old, and her mother had been deployed to Iraq for 6 months. Sophia came to the center every week, angry and scared and convinced that reading was stupid because what was the point of anything when your mom might not come home? I worked with her for months, slowly, patiently, finding books about brave girls, about families separated by distance but connected by love, about feeling scared and finding courage anyway. The day Sophia finished her first chapter book, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Miss Rebecca, I'm going to read this whole book to my mom when she gets home." So she knows I didn't give up, even when things were hard. That moment meant more to me than any medal or promotion ever could. That was the moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. My father could call it soft or easy or not a real challenge, but he was wrong. Working with broken-hearted children, helping them find hope and strength and joy in the middle of fear and uncertainty, that took everything I had and more. The Military Family Center became my second home. The director, a kind woman named Patricia, whose husband had served for 20 years, took me under her wing. She saw something in me that my father couldn't or wouldn't. She encouraged me to develop specialized programs, to reach out to more families, to think bigger about the impact I could have. "You have a gift, Rebecca," she told me one Saturday afternoon as we were packing up supplies. "You understand these kids in a way most people don't. You don't just see their struggles. You see their strength. You help them see it too." I thought about telling my father about Patricia's words, about the programs I was developing, about the families who were starting to specifically request me when they needed help. But I already knew how that conversation would go. He'd find some way to diminish it, to make it clear that what I was doing was nice but not important, helpful but not meaningful, good but not enough. So I stopped trying. I built my life, my career, my sense of purpose entirely separate from his approval. I told myself I didn't need it. I told myself I was fine without it. And most days, I almost believed it. Then there were the days when I'd see a father and daughter laughing together at the grocery store, or I'd watch one of my students run into their dad's arms after school, and the ache would come back. Sharp and sudden and impossible to ignore. I wanted that. I'd always wanted that. The simple, uncomplicated love of a father who was proud of his daughter just for being who she was. My therapist, Dr. Ellen Martinez, whom I'd started seeing 2 years before the wedding, said I was grieving a relationship that had never actually existed. "You're mourning the father you needed, not the father you have," she explained during one of our sessions. And that's a special kind of pain because you can't grieve something that was never there. You can only grieve the absence of it. She was right, of course, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two very different things. I could understand in my mind that my father's inability to see me wasn't about my value, but in my heart, in that deep place where the wounded child still lived, I felt like I'd failed some fundamental test of worthiness. Dr. Martinez helped me start to untangle that, to see how I'd internalized my father's disappointment, made it part of my identity, to recognize the ways I'd been trying to earn love that should have been given freely, to understand that his limitations were about him, not me. But understanding something and healing from it are not the same thing. I still carried the weight of his disappointment, still felt that stab of pain every time he looked through me instead of at me, still hoped, despite everything, that someday he'd see me, really see me. My mother tried, in her way. She'd call me after family gatherings and tell me she was proud of me, that she knew I was doing important work. But her words always felt hollow, like she was trying to compensate for my father's absence without actually addressing it. She'd make excuses for him, tell me he loved me in his own way, that he just didn't know how to show it. But love that feels like rejection isn't really love at all. It's something else, something painful and complicated and ultimately damaging. I loved my father, yes. But I was starting to realize I didn't like him very much. And more importantly, I was starting to understand that his inability to love me properly wasn't something I could fix. Then my sister Emma announced her engagement. Emma was the middle child, the mediator, the one who somehow managed to stay in everyone's good graces. She worked in hospital administration, had a fiancé named David who was a physical therapist, and planned a wedding that would bring our fractured family together for one beautiful day. "Please, Becca," she'd said to me over coffee 6 months before the wedding. "I know things are hard with Dad, but this is my day. Can you just be there?" For me? I looked at my sister, saw the hope in her eyes, and couldn't say no. Emma had always been kind to me. She'd never made me feel less than. If she wanted me at her wedding, I'd be there, even if it meant spending the day under my father's disappointed gaze. The months leading up to the wedding were a special kind of torture. Every planning session became an opportunity for my father to remind everyone of my inadequacies. When Emma asked me to give a speech as maid of honor, he actually laughed and said, "Let's hope she doesn't cry through the whole thing. Rebecca's always been too emotional for public speaking." I'd given dozens of presentations to rooms full of parents and administrators. I'd spoken at education conferences, but he didn't know that because he'd never asked. The morning of the wedding arrived with brilliant sunshine and my stomach in knots. I'd been up since 5, doing my makeup, fixing my hair, rehearsing my speech for the 100th time. The pale blue bridesmaid dress fit perfectly, and for once I actually felt pretty. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today he'd look at me and see something worth acknowledging. The ceremony was beautiful. Emma looked radiant as she walked down the aisle on my father's arm. I watched him beam with pride, saw the tears in his eyes as he gave her away, and felt that familiar ache in my chest. Would he ever look at me like that? Would I ever be enough? The reception was held at an upscale country club with crystal chandeliers and tables draped in ivory linens. There were 200 guests, mostly family friends, military colleagues of my father's, and people from David's large extended family. I found my seat at the head table, right next to my father, and braced myself for several hours of being ignored. Dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles and small talk. My father held court with his military buddies, telling old war stories and laughing at jokes I didn't understand. Every time I tried to join the conversation, he'd talk over me or turn to someone else. It was like being 13 again, desperately trying to connect with a father who'd already decided I wasn't worth his attention. Then came the speeches. Emma's father-in-law spoke about welcoming her into their family. Marcus, as best man, told funny stories about David that had everyone laughing. Then it was my turn. I stood up, my hands shaking slightly as I held my note cards. The room quieted down, and suddenly 200 pairs of eyes were on me. I took a deep breath and began. Emma has been my best friend since before I could walk. She's the person who taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, even when things are hard. It's about loving someone for who they are, not who you want them to be. I talked about our childhood, about the time Emma defended me when kids at school made fun of my glasses. I talked about how she'd been there through every difficult moment, every disappointment, every time I felt like I wasn't enough. My voice cracked a few times, but I pushed through, speaking from the heart about the sister who'd always made me feel valued. Emma sees people, I said, looking directly at my sister. Really sees them. She doesn't judge them for what they're not. She celebrates them for what they are. David, you're getting an incredible woman, someone who will make you feel like you matter, no matter what path you choose. The room erupted in applause. People were wiping their eyes. Emma was crying happy tears. For one moment, I felt like I'd done something right. Then I sat down, and my father leaned over. I expected maybe, just maybe, a word of acknowledgement. Instead, he shook his head and said in a low voice meant only for me, "That was too emotional, Rebecca. You always were a failed little soldier. Can't even handle a simple speech without getting weepy." The words hit me like a physical blow. Failed little soldier. After everything, after all these years, that's what I was to him. Not a successful teacher, not a caring sister, not a human being with her own dreams and achievements, just a failed version of what he'd wanted me to be. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, but cracked open. And through that crack, something new started to emerge, something that had been buried under years of trying to win his approval. I was about to say something, anything, when there was a commotion at the entrance to the ballroom. A group of men in military dress uniforms walked in, clearly arriving late. My father straightened immediately, his entire demeanor changing. "That's General Morrison," he whispered to the man next to him, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "My commanding officer." I didn't think he'd actually come. I watched as this General Morrison made his way through the room, shaking hands, apologizing for his late arrival. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Behind him were two other officers, both younger, both watching the room with professional interest. General Morrison reached our table, and my father stood so quickly he almost knocked over his water glass. They shook hands, exchanged pleasantries about the beautiful ceremony they'd missed. My father introduced Emma and David, then Marcus, praising each military achievement with the enthusiasm he'd never shown for anything I'd accomplished. Then the general's eyes landed on me. He stopped mid-sentence, his expression changing from polite interest to something like recognition. But that didn't make sense. I'd never met this man before in my life. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the conversation. He was staring at me with an intensity that made everyone else at the table uncomfortable. "You're Thomas Hartford's daughter?" "Yes, sir," I said quietly, confused by his attention. "I'm Rebecca." The general looked from me to my father, then back to me. His expression was difficult to read, something between surprise and disappointment. When he spoke again, his voice carried across several nearby tables. "Thomas, is this the daughter you told me about? The one working in education?" My father shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, sir. That's Rebecca." "And this," the general said, his voice taking on an edge that made my father visibly tense, "is the one you called a failed little soldier not 2 minutes ago?" The table went silent. The conversations around us stopped. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized the general had overheard my father's cruel comment. But how? He'd been across the room. One of the younger officers behind the general spoke up. "Sir has exceptional hearing, even in crowded rooms. It's legendary." General Morrison never took his eyes off my father. "Thomas, I've known you for 15 years. You've served with distinction and honor, but I have to tell you, hearing you dismiss your daughter like that, especially this daughter, is perhaps the most disappointing thing I've witnessed in my career." My father looked like he'd been slapped. "Sir, I don't understand." "Of course you don't," the general said. "Because you've been so focused on what you think matters that you've completely missed what actually does matter." He turned to me, and his expression softened. "Rebecca Hartford, I've wanted to meet you for a long time. Your principal, Margaret Chen, is my sister-in-law. She talks about you constantly, says you're the most gifted teacher she's ever worked with." The world tilted slightly. Principal Chen was related to a general. She'd never mentioned that. "Last year," the general continued, addressing the now completely silent table, "Rebecca developed a reading program for children with dyslexia. The program has been so successful that it's being implemented in schools across 3 states. She's helped hundreds of children who were told they'd never read properly, not just learn to read, but love reading." I felt tears prick my eyes, but for a completely different reason than before. "But that's not why I wanted to meet you," the general said. "Margaret told me about your work with military families." "About how you volunteer every weekend at the base family center, tutoring children whose parents are deployed overseas, how you've never missed a single session in 4 years, even when you were sick with pneumonia last winter." My father was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Around us, people were listening intently. "She told me," the general's voice grew quieter but somehow more powerful, "about a little boy named Christopher whose father was killed in action. How you worked with him for 18 months, helped him process his grief through books and writing. How you attended his father's funeral on your own time, sat with the family, supported them through the worst moment of their lives. Christopher is reading at grade level now. He wants to be a teacher because of you." I remembered Christopher. Sweet, broken Christopher with his father's dog tags around his neck and anger in his eyes that no 7-year-old should carry. I remembered holding him while he cried, reading to him until his breathing steadied, celebrating every small victory in his journey back to himself. Christopher had come to the family center 3 weeks after his father's funeral. His mother, Jennifer, was barely holding it together herself, trying to parent through her own grief while her son spiraled into rage and silence. She'd heard about my work from another military spouse and showed up one Saturday morning with this little boy who looked like he wanted to fight the entire world. "He won't talk," Jennifer had said, her voice breaking. "He won't cry. He just gets angry at everything. His teacher says he's disrupting the class. My family says he needs to be tough, to be strong, to honor his father's memory." "But he's 7 years old and his daddy is dead and I don't know how to help him." I looked at Christopher, saw the way he held himself rigid, saw the dog tags clutch so tight in his small fist that his knuckles were white, and my heart broke. I knew that kind of pain. Not from death, but from absence. From feeling like the person who should love you most just isn't there, not in the way you need them to be. Christopher, I said gently, kneeling down to his level. I'm Miss Rebecca. I teach kids to read, but I also help kids who are sad or angry or scared. Would it be okay if you and I spent some time together? He glared at me, his jaw clenched, but he nodded. Once, barely. We started slow. I didn't push him to talk about his father, didn't try to force emotions he wasn't ready to feel. Instead, I read to him. Books about loss, about grief, about children who survived impossible things. Books where the heroes were scared and sad and angry, but found their way through anyway. For weeks, he just listened. Didn't speak, didn't respond, just sat with his arms crossed and his face closed off. But he kept coming back, every Saturday. And slowly, imperceptibly, the rigid tension in his small body started to ease. The breakthrough came during a reading of The Invisible String, a book about how love connects us even when we're apart. I was reading about how the string stays connected no matter what, and Christopher suddenly burst into tears. But the string broke, he sobbed. When they killed my daddy, the string broke and now he's gone forever and I'm never going to see him again and it's not fair, and I hate it and I hate everything. I held him while he cried, this tiny human finally releasing the grief that had been choking him. The string didn't break, I told him softly. Your daddy died and that's real and it's terrible and it's not fair at all. But the love doesn't die. The connection doesn't break. It changes. It becomes different. But it's still there. How do you know? He asked, his voice small and broken. Because love isn't just about being in the same room, I said. It's about carrying someone in your heart. Your daddy is in your heart, Christopher. In your memories, in the things he taught you, in the way you carry yourself. Every time you're brave, he's there. Every time you're kind, he's there. Every time you laugh or love or choose to keep going, even when things are hard, he's there. We worked together for 18 months. Slowly, carefully, Christopher learned to read through his grief. We chose books together, books about soldiers and heroes, books about loss and recovery, books about boys who missed their fathers but found strength anyway. He started writing stories about his dad, about the memories he never wanted to forget, about the man he wanted to become. His reading improved dramatically, but more than that, he started to heal. Started to smile again, started to play with other kids, started to believe that life could be good, even though it would never be the same. His mother cried tears of gratitude more than once, thanking me for giving her son back to her. The day of Captain Mitchell's funeral, I hadn't planned to go. I'd never met the man, only known his son in the aftermath of his death. But Christopher had asked his mother if I could come, and Jennifer had called me with tears in her voice, saying it would mean the world to both of them. So I went. I sat with the family, held Christopher's hand while he watched them fold the flag, stayed with them through the reception afterward when people said all the wrong things in all the wrong ways. I watched military families support each other through impossible grief, watched a community wrap around a widow and her son, and understood in a deeper way why my work mattered. These families sacrificed everything: their stability, their time together, their peace of mind, sometimes their lives. And their children, these innocent kids who didn't choose military life but inherited its costs anyway, needed someone to see them, to help them, to tell them it was okay to be sad and scared and angry, and that those feelings didn't make them weak. After the funeral, General Morrison had approached me. I didn't know who he was then, just another officer paying respects. He'd thanked me for being there, for supporting the family. "Are you family?" he'd asked. "No, sir," I'd said. "I'm Christopher's reading tutor. I work with military families at the base family center." He'd looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. "Christopher is lucky to have you," he'd said. Then he'd moved on, and I'd forgotten about the encounter until months later, when he'd walked into my sister's wedding and changed everything. But Christopher was just one child. There were dozens more, hundreds if I counted all the students I'd worked with over the years. Kids dealing with deployments, with PTSD and their parents, with constant moves and disrupted educations, and the weight of being brave when they were terrified. Kids who needed someone to tell them that their feelings mattered, that their struggles were real, that they deserved support and understanding and help. That was my service. Not combat, not commands, not the kind of sacrifice my father valued, but sacrifice nonetheless. Giving my time, my energy, my heart to children who needed someone to believe in them. Sitting with grief and fear and anger, helping kids navigate emotions that most adults couldn't handle. Building programs and creating resources and training other educators because the need was so much bigger than what I could address alone. My reading program for dyslexic children had started with one student, a little girl named Olivia who cried every time she had to read out loud because the letters wouldn't stay still and everyone thought she was stupid. I'd spent months researching, talking to specialists, developing new approaches. When Olivia finally read her first book without crying, without frustration, with actual joy on her face, I knew I'd found something that could help others too. I'd written it up, shared it with other teachers, presented it at education conferences. School districts started reaching out, wanting to implement the program. Parents of dyslexic children were contacting me, desperate for help. Within 2 years, the program was being used in schools across 3 states, helping hundreds of children who'd been told they'd never be good readers discover that they absolutely could be. My father never asked about any of it. Never showed interest in the program that was changing children's lives. Never acknowledged that maybe, possibly, I'd accomplished something meaningful. Because in his world, if it wasn't military, it didn't count. That boy's father, the general said, and now his voice carried steel, was one of my soldiers. I attended his funeral. I saw you there, Rebecca. I didn't know who you were then, but I never forgot the young woman who sat with a grieving family like she was one of them. When Margaret told me that was her star teacher, Thomas Hartford's daughter, I couldn't believe it. The general turned back to my father, and the disappointment in his eyes was crushing. You have a daughter who serves our military families with more dedication than most soldiers show. Who's changed the lives of our children, given them tools to succeed when their parents are fighting for our country. And you call her a failed soldier? My father's face had gone from red to pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Sir, I didn't know about... You didn't know because you never asked, the general said bluntly. I've heard you talk about Marcus's achievements. You've mentioned them at every meeting, every social function, every opportunity. I thought you must have only one child because you've never once mentioned Rebecca. Now I understand why. You were too busy being disappointed that she chose service over combat to notice that she was serving just as much, just differently. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma was crying again, but this time she was looking at me with something like awe. Marcus looked stunned. David was squeezing Emma's hand, both of them watching this unfold. In my 35 years of service, the general said, addressing the entire table now, I've learned that courage comes in many forms. Yes, it takes courage to face enemy fire, but it also takes courage to face a grieving child and help them find hope again. It takes courage to dedicate your life to lifting others up, knowing you'll never get medals or recognition for it. It takes courage to keep serving when your own family doesn't see your service as valuable. He looked at me again, and this time there was warmth in his expression. Rebecca, I came here today because Margaret insisted I had to meet you in person. She wanted me to offer you something. The Army is launching a new education initiative for military families, developing programs to support children dealing with the stress of deployment and relocation. We need someone to lead the civilian education component. Someone who understands both the military culture and the needs of children. Someone with your experience and heart. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was hearing. The position would be a consultancy, he continued. You'd keep your teaching position but work with our team to develop programs, train educators, and support military family centers across the country. It's a 2-year contract with possibility of extension. The impact would be national, helping thousands of military children. He pulled out a card and handed it to me. Think about it. Talk to Margaret. She has all the details. But Rebecca, I want you to know something. What you do matters. It matters to the families you serve. It matters to the children you teach. It matters to soldiers like me who worry about our families while we're deployed. You're making a difference in ways that most people never will. The general shook my hand, then turned to my father one last time. Thomas, you're a good soldier, but you're failing as a father. I suggest you figure out which role is more important before it's too late. Then he was gone, his entourage following him out, leaving behind a table full of shocked people and me holding a business card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The silence stretched. Emma broke it first, getting up and coming around the table to throw her arms around me. Becca, why didn't you tell us? About any of this? I hugged her back, still trying to process everything. I didn't think anyone cared. Are you kidding? Marcus said, and there was genuine emotion in his voice. That was incredible. I had no idea you were doing all that. I looked at my brother, saw real admiration in his eyes, and something in my chest loosened slightly. Marcus had never been cruel to me. He'd just followed Dad's lead, not realizing the damage it caused. But it was my father I couldn't look at. Not yet. The silence from his end of the table was louder than any of his disappointed comments had ever been. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. People kept coming up to me, asking about my work, about the reading program, about the volunteer tutoring. Apparently, the general's words had traveled through the room faster than wildfire. Emma's new in-laws spent 20 minutes asking me about teaching methods for their grandson who was struggling in school. David's sister wanted information about the dyslexia program for her school district. For the first time in my life at a family function, I was seen. Really seen. Not as the disappointing daughter, not as the one who chose wrong, but as myself. As Rebecca, who'd found her own way to serve, to matter, to make a difference. My father didn't approach me all night. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, his expression unreadable, but he never came over. Part of me was relieved. Part of me was heartbroken. Even after everything, even after the general's words, he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge me. It was late when the reception finally wound down. Emma and David had left in a shower of bubbles and good wishes. Most of the guests had departed. I was gathering my things when I heard footsteps behind me. Rebecca, can we talk? It was my father. He looked older somehow, like the evening had aged him. His military posture was still there, but something in his face had changed. I wanted to say no, wanted to walk away the way he'd walked away from me so many times. But Emma's words from months ago echoed in my head. Family shows up, even when it's hard. Okay, I said quietly. We walked out to the terrace. The night was cool, stars visible above the city lights. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I didn't know, he finally said. His voice was rough. About the volunteering, about Christopher, about any of it. You never asked, I said, and there was no anger in my voice anymore, just truth. He flinched like I'd hit him. No, I didn't. I was so focused on what I thought you should be doing that I never looked at what you were actually doing. Why? The question I'd carried for 28 years finally emerged. Why wasn't I enough? Why did I have to be a soldier to matter to you? My father was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My father was a drunk. He was violent, unpredictable, weak. I watched him destroy our family with his inability to discipline himself, to be strong. When I joined the military, it saved me. It taught me structure, strength, purpose. It made me into someone I could respect. He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. When you were born, I looked at you, and I wanted to give you that same strength. I wanted to protect you from ever being weak, ever being vulnerable, ever being hurt the way I was hurt. In my mind, the military was the only path to that strength. Everything else seemed soft, risky, dangerous. So you tried to make me into something I wasn't, I said softly. I tried to make you into what saved me, he corrected. And in doing that, I completely missed who you actually are, what you actually do, how strong you actually are in ways I never learned to be. Tears were running down my face now, but I didn't wipe them away. That general was right, my father continued. I've been failing you. Not because you weren't good enough, because I wasn't. I couldn't see past my own fear and experience to recognize that there are different kinds of courage, different ways to serve, different paths to strength. He turned to face me fully, and I saw tears in his eyes too. Colonel Thomas Hartford, who I'd never seen cry, not even at his mother's funeral. Rebecca, what you do terrifies me. You open yourself up to other people's pain. You give your heart to children who might break it. You serve without armor, without weapons, without any of the protections I spent my life building. That's not weakness. That's a kind of bravery I don't possess. Dad, I started, but he shook his head. Let me finish, please. I need to say this. He took a shaky breath. I called you a failed soldier today. That was cruel and wrong. You're not a failed soldier. You're not a soldier at all. You're something better. You're someone who sees hurting people and helps them. Someone who takes broken kids and teaches them they can still be whole. Someone who serves without needing recognition or medals or rank. He reached out hesitantly, like he wasn't sure he had the right, and took my hand. I'm so sorry, Rebecca. I'm sorry for every time I made you feel less than. I'm sorry for not seeing you. I'm sorry for measuring you against the wrong standard. I'm sorry for being so locked into my own vision that I missed the incredible woman you became despite me, not because of me. The dam broke. I was sobbing now, 28 years of hurt pouring out under the stars. And my father, this man who'd taught me that emotions were weakness, pulled me into his arms and held me while I cried. I'm proud of you, he whispered into my hair. I should have said that years ago. I should have said it every day. I'm proud of who you are. I'm proud of what you do. I'm proud that you're my daughter, even though I don't deserve to be. We stood there for a long time, two broken people trying to find a way back to each other. It wasn't a magical fix. 28 years of damage couldn't be repaired in one conversation, but it was a start. A crack in the wall that had stood between us for so long. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were a mess. My makeup was ruined. His dress uniform had tear stains on the shoulder. But somehow, we were both smiling a little. Will you tell me about them? He asked. About the kids you teach? About Christopher? About all of it? Yes, I said. If you really want to know. I do. I really do. I've missed so much, Rebecca. I'd like to try to understand who you are, if you'll let me. We sat down on a bench and I started talking. I told him about my students, about the reading program, about the challenges and victories of teaching. I told him about the military families, about sitting with Christopher at his father's funeral, about the thank you cards I kept in a box at home from parents whose children I'd helped. He listened, really listened, asked questions that showed he was paying attention, that he cared about the answers. And slowly, carefully, we started building something new. Not replacing what was broken, but creating something different alongside it. The sun was starting to come up when we finally headed to our cars. Emma and David were probably on a plane to their honeymoon by now. Marcus had left hours ago. It was just us, father and daughter, at the end of a night that had changed everything. Rebecca, my father said as we reached my car. That job the general mentioned. Are you going to take it? I'd been thinking about it all night. The card was in my purse, a tangible reminder that my work had value beyond what I'd imagined. I think so, I said. It's a chance to help more kids, more families, to make a bigger impact. He nodded slowly. You'd be good at it. Better than good. Those military families would be lucky to have you. The words were simple, but coming from him, they meant everything. Will you come to dinner next week? He asked. Your mother would love to see you, and I'd like to hear more about your work, about your life, about everything I've missed. I'll be there, I said. He hugged me goodbye, and this time it didn't feel stiff or obligatory. It felt like a father hugging his daughter, like maybe we were finding our way to something real. I drove home as the sun rose over the city, my mind whirling with everything that had happened. The wedding had been beautiful. My speech had gone well. But what I'd remember most was the moment everything changed. The moment a general walked in and saw me for who I actually was. The moment my father's eyes were open to the daughter he'd been too blind to see. The card sat on my passenger seat. I picked it up at a red light, running my thumb over the embossed text. An opportunity to expand my work, to help more children, to make a real difference on a national scale. A year ago, I would have been too afraid to consider it, too convinced of my own inadequacy. But something had shifted tonight, not just in my relationship with my father, but in how I saw myself. For so long, I'd carried his disappointment like it was truth. I'd let his narrow definition of success make me question my own path. But hearing the general speak, hearing the pride in his voice when he talked about what I'd accomplished, I realized something important. I wasn't a failed soldier. I'd never wanted to be a soldier in the first place. I'd wanted to be a teacher, and I was a damn good one. I'd wanted to help children, and I'd helped hundreds. I'd wanted to make a difference, and I had. The fact that my difference looked different than my father's didn't make it less valuable. I got home and sat in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of my life. Bookshelves full of children's literature and teaching guides, a bulletin board covered in thank you notes from students and parents, photos of classroom moments, field trips, celebrations of small victories that meant everything to the kids involved. This was my service. This was my contribution, and it mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma, sent from the airport. Thank you for being there today, and thank you for being you. I love you, big sister. I smiled, texting back a heart emoji. Then another text came through, this one from my mother. Your father just told me what happened. He's been up all night thinking about it. He wants to do better, Becca. We both do. Please give us a chance. I would give them a chance. Not because I owed them one, but because that's what family does. Shows up even when it's hard. Forgives even when it hurts. Tries again even after failing. But more than that, I was giving myself a chance. A chance to step into this new opportunity without the weight of someone else's expectations. A chance to define success on my own terms. A chance to be proud of who I was, what I'd built, what I'd become. Monday morning, I called the number on the general's card. His assistant answered, and within minutes, I was connected to him directly. "Rebecca," he said warmly, "I hoped you'd call." "I want to know more about the position," I said. "About what it would involve, what you're hoping to accomplish." We talked for over an hour. He explained the program, the scope of the work, the potential impact. It was ambitious, challenging, and exactly the kind of opportunity I'd always dreamed of, but never thought I deserved. "We need someone who understands trauma and resilience," he said. "Someone who can create programs that truly help military children cope with the unique stresses they face. Margaret says you're that person. After meeting you, I agree." "I'm interested," I said, and saying the words out loud felt powerful. Very interested. "Good. I'll have Margaret send over the formal proposal. Take your time reviewing it. Talk to your principal about how it would work with your current position. But Rebecca, I want you to know something. We're not doing you a favor by offering this. You'd be doing us one by accepting." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at nothing and everything. My whole life, I'd been trying to prove I was enough for my father. And in doing so, I'd almost missed something crucial. I'd been enough all along, not for him, but for myself, for the children I taught, for the families I served, for the work that called to me. The following week, I went to my parents' house for dinner. It was awkward at first. 28 years of patterns don't disappear overnight, but my father asked about my students by name. He wanted to know about the reading program, how it worked, what made it effective. He listened when I talked, really listened, and I watched my mother's eyes fill with tears of relief as we had the first real conversation we'd had in years. "I talked to General Morrison," my father said over coffee after dinner. "Asked him more about the position they offered you. He said if you take it, you'd be working with some of the top education specialists in the country, developing programs that could help thousands of military kids." "I'm taking it," I said. I'd made the decision that morning after reviewing the proposal and talking it over with Principal Chen. "It's a 2-year contract and I'll still teach part-time. It's a lot of work, but it's important work." My father nodded slowly. Then he did something that shocked me. He stood up, walked over to where I sat, and saluted me. "Colonel Thomas Hartford, United States Army, recognizing the valuable service of educator Rebecca Hartford," he said formally. Then his voice softened. "I'm proud of you, Rebecca. Genuinely, deeply proud of who you are and what you do." I stood and hugged him, and this time there was no hesitation on either side. Just a father and daughter finding their way back to each other. The months that followed were intense. I started the consultancy position, traveling to military bases, meeting with educators, developing curriculum. The work was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. I met children from all over the country, heard their stories, saw their struggles, and I got to be part of creating something that would help them. The first base I visited was Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Walking onto that installation, seeing soldiers in uniform everywhere, I felt like I was stepping into my father's world for the first time. Not as a disappointing daughter, but as a professional with something valuable to offer. It was strange and empowering in equal measure. I met with a group of teachers who worked in the on-base school system. They were dedicated, compassionate people who genuinely wanted to help their students, but they were overwhelmed. Military children faced unique challenges that traditional education programs didn't address. Frequent moves meant constant disruption to their education. Parental deployment meant emotional stress that affected their ability to learn. PTSD in parents created instability at home that followed children into the classroom. "We have kids who've been to 5 different schools by 3rd grade, one teacher told me, her voice tight with frustration. How are we supposed to create continuity for them? How do we help them feel safe and stable when their entire lives are defined by instability? I spent 3 days with those teachers, sharing what I'd learned from working with Christopher and dozens of other military children. We talked about trauma-informed teaching, about creating safe spaces in classrooms, about recognizing the signs of a child struggling with deployment-related stress. We developed strategies together, building on their experience and my specialized knowledge. By the end of the visit, we'd outlined a comprehensive support program for the school. But more than that, I'd seen something shift in those teachers. They'd come in feeling helpless and left feeling empowered. They had tools now, strategies, a framework for supporting their students more effectively. "You've given us hope," the principal told me as I was leaving. "For the first time in years, I feel like we might actually be able to make a real difference for these kids." I carried that with me to the next base and the next. Each installation had its own challenges, its own unique population of children needing support. But the core issues were the same. These kids needed educators who understood their specific struggles, who could help them navigate the emotional complexity of military life, while also helping them succeed academically. My father started following my work from a distance. He'd never been one for phone calls, but suddenly he was texting me every few days, asking how the base visits were going, whether I needed anything. It was awkward at first, these tentative attempts at connection. But slowly, they became something I looked forward to. "How was Fort Campbell?" He'd text. "Hard but good. Met a teacher who's been working with military kids for 20 years. She taught me as much as I taught her." That's what good leaders do. They learn from everyone, even when they're supposed to be teaching. It was the kind of validation I'd craved my entire life. Not effusive, not dramatic, just simple acknowledgement that what I was doing mattered, that I was doing it well, that I was worthy of respect. 3 months into the consultancy, I returned to my home base, exhausted and exhilarated. My apartment felt too quiet after weeks of constant travel and interaction. I was unpacking when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my father standing there, holding a bag of takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. "Your mother told me you were getting back today," he said, looking uncertain in a way I'd never seen him. "I thought you might be too tired to cook." I stared at him for a moment, processing this unexpected gesture. Then I stepped aside and let him in. We ate together at my small kitchen table, and he asked questions about my work. Real questions, showing genuine interest. He wanted to know about the bases I'd visited, the educators I'd trained, the programs I was developing. And he listened to my answers, really listened, asking follow-up questions that showed he was paying attention. "I talked to General Morrison last week," he said as we were finishing dinner. "He said your work at Fort Bragg was exceptional." Said the teachers there are already implementing the strategies you taught them, and they're seeing real improvements in their students. He said that? I felt tears prick my eyes. He did. He also said I was an idiot for not seeing your value sooner. He was right. My father set down his fork and looked at me directly. "Rebecca, I want to do better. Not just say it, but actually do it. I want to be part of your life in a real way, if you'll let me." "I want that too," I said softly. "But Dad, I need you to understand something. I can't keep trying to be the daughter you wanted. I can only be the daughter I am. And if that's not enough for you, it's enough," he interrupted. "More than enough. You're extraordinary, Rebecca. The work you're doing, the lives you're changing, the person you are. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to be someone else to earn my love. That was my failure. Not yours. We talked late into the night, having the kinds of conversations we should have been having for years. He told me more about his childhood, about his father's alcoholism, about the fear and chaos that had defined his early years. I started to understand why he'd clung so desperately to the structure and discipline of military life, why anything outside that rigid framework felt dangerous to him. I thought I was protecting you, he said. By pushing you toward the military, I thought I was giving you the tools to never be vulnerable, never be hurt. But all I did was hurt you myself. And I taught you that your father's love was conditional, which is the worst lesson any parent can teach their child. We can't change the past, I said, but we can change what happens next. I'd like that, he said. And slowly, carefully, we did. He started coming to my presentations when I spoke at local venues. He'd sit in the audience and afterward tell me what resonated with him, what he'd learned. Sometimes he'd share stories from his own experience that illuminated why certain military children struggled the way they did. One evening, after I'd given a talk at a community center about supporting children through parental deployment, a young soldier approached me. He had a baby carrier strapped to his chest, a tiny infant sleeping against him. Miss Hartford, I just wanted to thank you. I'm deploying next month, and my wife is terrified about how it's going to affect our daughter. Hearing you talk about how we can stay connected, how we can help her feel secure even when I'm gone, it gave us hope. My father had witnessed this interaction. On the drive home, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "That's what service looks like. That soldier is going to deploy with less fear because of what you taught him tonight. His wife is going to parent with more confidence. Their daughter is going to be okay because you gave them tools to help her. That's profound, Rebecca." "It's what you've always done too," I pointed out. "Just differently." "Maybe. But I think your way might be more important. I can protect people from external threats. You protect them from internal ones, and those are often harder to fight." The consultancy work intensified. I was traveling constantly, sometimes visiting 3 bases in a single week. It was exhausting, but I'd never felt more purposeful. Every educator I trained, every program I helped implement, every child who benefited from the resources we were creating, it all mattered so much. My father started joining me on some visits. At first, I was hesitant. I'd built this professional identity separate from him, and I wasn't sure I wanted to mix those worlds. But he approached it with genuine humility, positioning himself as someone there to learn and support, not to lead or take over. We visited Fort Hood together, and I watched him interact with military families in a completely different way than I'd ever seen. He was open, vulnerable even, talking about his own failures as a father, about what he'd missed while prioritizing his career. The families responded to his honesty, sharing their own struggles and fears. My father started coming to some of my presentations. He'd sit in the back of the room, watching as I trained teachers or spoke to groups of military families. Afterward, he'd tell me what he'd learned, ask questions about my methods, share stories about soldiers he'd known whose families struggled with these issues. "I never understood," he told me after one particularly emotional presentation, "how much our children carry when we serve, how much they sacrifice too. What you're doing, helping these families, it's as crucial as any military operation. Maybe more so." Marcus called one day out of the blue. He'd been deployed, but had just returned stateside. "Dad told me about your new position, about everything that happened at the wedding. Becca, I'm sorry. I should have paid more attention. Should have stood up for you." "You didn't know," I said gently. "None of us really knew how bad it had gotten." "Yeah, but I could have asked. Could have been a better brother. I'd like to do better now, if you'll let me." Family, I was learning, wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, trying, failing, trying again. It was about seeing each other, really seeing each other, and choosing connection over comfort. 6 months into the consultancy, I was invited to speak at a national education conference. The topic was supporting children through trauma, specifically military children dealing with deployment and loss. It was the biggest speaking engagement of my career, and I was terrified. The night before the conference, my father called. "Rebecca, I know you're nervous about tomorrow. Your mother told me you've been practicing your speech all week." "I have," I admitted. "There are going to be hundreds of educators there, people with way more experience than me. I keep thinking they're going to realize I don't know what I'm doing." "Do you remember what you said in your speech at Emma's wedding?" he asked. "About Emma seeing people for who they are?" "Yes." "You do that, Rebecca. You see people. You see children who are hurting and you help them. You see families who are struggling and you support them. That's not something you learn from experience. That's who you are. Those educators tomorrow, they need to hear from someone with your heart, not just your credentials." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thanks, Dad. You're going to be great. Just speak from your heart like you always do. And Rebecca, I'm proud of you. Not because of this conference or the consultancy or any external achievement. I'm proud of the person you are, the person you've always been. I'm just sorry it took me so long to see it." The conference went better than I could have imagined. I talked about Christopher, about the reading program, about what I'd learned working with military families. I shared strategies, sure, but more than that, I shared stories. Stories of resilience, of children finding strength in impossible circumstances, of families pulling together when everything tried to tear them apart. The response was overwhelming. Educators lined up afterward to talk, to ask questions, to share their own experiences. I exchanged contact information with dozens of teachers who wanted to implement similar programs in their schools. By the end of the day, I was exhausted but energized in a way I'd never experienced. My father was waiting in the hotel lobby when I came down that evening. "I flew in this afternoon," he explained. "Wanted to be here." "Hope that's okay. You came all this way just for my conference?" "Rebecca, I've missed too much of your life already. I don't want to miss any more. Besides, I wanted to see you in action. You were incredible up there. Those educators were hanging on every word." We had dinner together that night, and he asked questions about the conference, about my plans for the program, about what came next. It was the kind of conversation we should have been having for years, the kind of conversation we were finally having now. "I've been thinking," he said over dessert, "about retirement. I've got 2 years left until mandatory. I always assumed I'd serve until they forced me out. But lately, I've been wondering if there's more to life than the military." "What would you do?" I asked, curious. My father had been a soldier for 30 years. I couldn't imagine him as anything else. "Your mother wants to travel, and I'd like to spend more time with my kids, really get to know them, not just the versions I'd created in my head. Plus, I've been talking to General Morrison about the program you're building." He thinks there might be a role for retired officers, working with active duty families, helping them navigate the transitions. "You'd want to work on the program?" I was genuinely surprised. "If you'd have me, I can't undo the years I missed, Rebecca, but I'd like to use what I do know about military life to help, to be part of what you're building. Not to take over or change it, but to support it, to support you." The girl I'd been a year ago would have been skeptical, would have seen it as another attempt to control, to shape me into what he wanted. But I'd changed. I could see his offer for what it was, a genuine attempt to connect, to be involved in my life in a meaningful way. "I'd like that," I said. "I think you could really help. You understand the military culture in ways I never will, and these families, they need people who've been where they are, who understand what service costs." His eyes got bright. Thank you for giving me this chance, for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. You're my father, I said simply. I love you, even when you drive me crazy, even when you hurt me. That doesn't just go away. I love you too, he said. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it in a way you could feel. But I'm learning. Better late than never, right? Better late than never, I agreed. The 2 years of my consultancy passed faster than I could have imagined. The program expanded beyond anything I'd initially envisioned. We developed comprehensive support systems for military children, trained thousands of educators, created resources that were being used across the country. The work was hard, sometimes heartbreaking, but deeply fulfilling. My father kept his word. He retired from active duty and joined the program as a consultant, working with active military families. He was good at it too, using his experience to help soldiers understand the impact of deployment on their children, to give them tools to stay connected even when separated by thousands of miles. We worked together sometimes, co-presenting at military bases. It was strange and wonderful, standing beside my father as partners rather than disappointment and disappointed. He'd introduce me to rooms full of soldiers, talking about my work with genuine pride. I'd watch him connect with military families, using his own struggles to help them navigate theirs. You know what's funny? He said to me one day as we drove between base visits. For 30 years, I thought the military was the only thing that mattered. That service meant putting on a uniform and carrying a weapon. But watching you work, seeing the impact you have, I realize I had it backward. The uniform doesn't make the service. The service is in how you show up for people, how you help them, how you make their lives better. You've been serving all along. I just couldn't see it. We all serve differently, I said. Your service mattered too, Dad. You protected people, kept them safe. That's important. It is, he agreed. But so is what you do. I wish I'd understood that sooner. I wish I'd told you how much it mattered, how much you mattered, before a general had to do it for me. But you understand now, I said. That's what counts. And you're here now, making a difference. It's never too late to choose differently. Emma and David had a baby that year, a little girl they named Rebecca after me. When Emma called to tell me, I cried happy tears. You're the person I admire most in this world, Emma said. The person I want my daughter to be like. Strong, compassionate, brave enough to choose her own path. At the baby's christening, my father held his granddaughter and looked at me with tears in his eyes. I see it now, he said quietly. The strength in choosing love over fear, the courage in being vulnerable, the service in caring for others without needing recognition. You've taught me so much, Rebecca. You've made me a better person. You taught me things too, I said. Discipline, perseverance, the importance of commitment. I just had to figure out how to apply those things to my own path. You did more than that, he said. You took the good parts of how I raised you and left behind the harmful parts. You became who you were meant to be, despite my best efforts to make you into someone else. That takes strength I'm not sure I possess. I looked at my tiny niece, sleeping peacefully in her grandfather's arms, and thought about what I'd want for her. Not that she'd follow any particular path, but that she'd have the courage to find her own. That she'd be surrounded by people who saw her for who she was, not who they wanted her to be. That she'd know, without doubt, that she was enough exactly as she was. The consultancy contract ended, but the program continued. I went back to teaching full-time but stayed involved as an advisor. It was the right balance, keeping me connected to the work I'd started while allowing me to return to my first love, teaching children to read. My classroom was full of diverse kids with different backgrounds, abilities, and needs. I loved them all fiercely, saw potential in each one, celebrated every small victory. And when parents came in worried that their child wasn't reading at grade level or wasn't fitting the standard mold, I'd think about my own journey and tell them something I'd learned the hard way. There are many paths to success, many ways to be strong, many forms of service. The goal isn't to force children into predetermined boxes, but to help them discover who they are and give them tools to become the best version of that person. My father came to my classroom sometimes, volunteering as a reading buddy for struggling students. It was surreal, watching this retired colonel sit cross-legged on a carpet, patiently helping a 7-year-old sound out words. But he was good at it, bringing the same dedication to reading with kids that he'd once brought to military operations. "I get it now," he told me after one session. "Why you love this." There's something incredible about watching a child's face light up when something finally clicks, when they realize they can do something they thought was impossible. "That's why I teach," I said, "for those moments, for the chance to tell kids they're capable of more than they know." "You told me that once," he said quietly. "When you were 7. You said you wanted to help kids discover they were smart. I dismissed it as childish dreaming, but you knew even then what you were meant to do." "And you knew what you were meant to do," I said. "We just took different roads." "But both roads mattered," he said. "Both roads served. I wish I'd understood that sooner, but I understand it now. That's something." It was something. It was everything, actually. Because the girl who'd stood in that ballroom a few years ago, hearing her father call her a failed soldier, would never have believed this future was possible, would never have imagined her father in her classroom, supporting her work, seeing her value. Would never have dreamed of speaking at conferences, running national programs, making a measurable difference in thousands of children's lives. But that girl had been wrong about something crucial. She'd thought she needed her father's approval to be enough. She'd thought his disappointment meant she'd failed. What she'd learned, what she now knew in her bones, was that she'd been enough all along. His inability to see her worth didn't diminish that worth. It never had. I was Rebecca Hartford. Teacher, advocate, consultant, daughter, sister, aunt, friend. I served in my own way, made a difference in my own way, mattered in my own way, and that was enough. It had always been enough. I just finally believed it. And maybe that's what courage really is. Not the absence of fear or the willingness to face danger, but the ability to be yourself in a world that constantly tells you to be someone else. The strength to walk your own path even when others can't understand it. The faith to believe in your own worth even when the people who should see it most clearly cannot. I'd found that courage. I'd walked that path. And in doing so, I'd not only changed my own life, but had helped change others' lives too. The children I taught, the families I served, even my father, who'd learned that love doesn't require sameness, that pride doesn't require conformity, that service comes in infinite forms. We were all still learning, still growing, still figuring out how to be better versions of ourselves, but we were doing it together now. Not as disappointment and disappointed, but as two people who'd found their way to understanding, respect, and genuine love. And that wedding, that moment when everything shattered and rebuilt, would always be the line in my life. Before, when I believed I wasn't enough, and after, when I finally knew I was.